Dear students, after studying the typical rib and typical vertebra, that is thoracic vertebra, let us learn about the sternum. What is meant by the word sternum? The word sternum is derived from the Greek word sternon, which means chest. So, the sternum is also known as breastbone or chest bone. In this picture, you can see the sternum, which is contributing for the anterior thoracic wall. So, it is located in the anterior wall of the thorax and it extends from the root of neck to upper part of the anterior abdominal wall. Structurally, it contains cancellous bone and within that there is the hematopoietic bone marrow is there. In this picture, you are seeing the sternum and its articulation with the costal cartilages and also with the clavicle you are seeing. And you can see this is the costal margin which is formed by the lower ribs below the 7th, and then the angle between the two costal margins is the costal angle. Now let us see what is the shape, length and parts of the sternum. The sternum is like a dagger. It consists of a elongated, vertical and flat appearance. Its length is about 15 to 20 centimeters and it is a subcutaneous bone. That means you can feel the bone through the skin. So pass your fingers starting from the root of the neck downwards. You can feel the sternum. Coming to the parts of the sternum, it consists of 3 parts, but it is a single bone with 3 parts. What are those 3 parts? From above downwards, they are the Manubrium sterni, the body and xiphoid process. So, the Manubrium sterni is the uppermost part. Then in the middle is the corpus sterni or body of sternum, which is made up of 4 sternebrae, and the caudal one is the xiphoid process. Now let us study the Manubrium. The word Manubrium is derived from Latin, which means handle of a sword or dagger. We have learned that sternum means dagger. So the Manubrium is the handle of the dagger. And the shape of the Manubrium is quadrilateral and it is located opposite the thoracic 3rd and 4th vertebrae. If you see the presenting parts, it presents upper border, lower border and 2 lateral borders. And the surfaces are anterior and posterior surfaces. Coming to the upper border, it presents 2 notches. One is the jugular or suprasternal notch, which is centrally placed, and the other one is the clavicular notch. Coming to the jugular notch, it is central in position, and to this part of the upper border of the sternum, the 2 layers of general investing layer of deep fascia will be attached to it with a space in between called the suprasternal space of Burns, and this is the place you will find the interclavicular ligament connecting the 2 clavicles. Then we are seeing the clavicular notch, which is for articulation with the sternal end of the clavicle, forming the sternoclavicular joint. Coming to the lower border, it articulates with the upper end of body of sternum, and this articulation forms an angle known as the Manubrium-sternal joint. It is forming, and this angle is called the sternal angle. And the lateral border articulates with first and second ribs. Now, focus on the superior border, which is thick and concave. And the features are the jugular notch, which contains the interclavicular ligament, and the attachment of two layers of general investing layer of deep cervical fascia of neck and containing the suprasternal space of Burns. Then you are seeing the clavicular attachment. Clavicular notch for the medial end of clavicle, forming the sternoclavicular joint. Now, coming to the inferior border. It articulates with the upper border of body of the sternum, forming the Manubrium-sternal joint, which is a secondary cartilaginous joint. It forms an angle called the angle of Lewis or sternal angle, and it is a palpable landmark. You can feel it by running your finger transversely at the junction of this manubrium and body, where it becomes continuous with the second costal cartilage. So, the sternal angle is a palpable landmark. And what is the importance of this sternal angle? So, because you are seeing the second costal cartilage here, you can count the ribs starting from the second costal cartilage at the sternal angle. And you can see the arch of aorta, the red one, which begins and ends at this level. Then you can see this trachea, the vertical one, which is bifurcating at the level of the sternal angle into right and left bronchi. And it also forms the boundary between the superior mediastinum and inferior mediastinum. This is the posterior surface of the manubrium you are seeing. So, the inferior border, you can draw a line, and that forms the boundary between the superior mediastinum and the inferior mediastinum, wherein you are seeing the heart. Coming to the lateral border, it presents two notches. The upper one is for articulation with the first costal cartilage, and it forms the primary cartilaginous joint. The lower one is a demi-facet, which with a similar facet on the body of the sternum will form articulation with the second costal cartilage, which is a synovial joint. Coming to the surfaces of the manubrium, it presents an anterior surface which is convex side to side and concave from above downwards. Convex from side to side and concave from above downwards. Then there is a posterior surface which is concave and forms the anterior boundary for the superior mediastinum. So, this only you have to consider, because this is the posterior surface of the manubrium and this is the posterior surface of the body of the sternum. So, the posterior surface of manubrium is concave and forms the anterior boundary of superior mediastinum. So the anterior surface gives origin to sternal heads of the pectoralis major along the lateral border and sternomastoid in the upper part. On the posterior surface, it gives attachment to certain muscles. So in the upper part, it gives origin to the sternohyoid muscle, and in the lower part to the sternothyroid muscle. In addition, it is related to arch of aorta in its lower part and the branches arising from the arch of aorta in the upper part. So what are these branches from right to left? They are the brachiocephalic left common carotid and left subclavian arteries. In addition, it also gives attachment, or it is related to the pleura and lungs in its lateral part. The other structures that are related to Manubrium on its posterior surface are the trachea, esophagus and thymus. Trachea you have seen in the previous slide. So, the Manubrium on its anterior surface gives origin to the muscles, the pectoralis major and sternomastoid muscle, both sternal heads of the sternomastoid. It gives attachment. Then on the posterior surface, two muscles take origin. They are the sternohyoid and sternothyroid muscles. Now let us see the articulations or joints which the Manubrium makes with the other bones. We are seeing the Manubrium. Now you know about the borders and surfaces of the Manubrium. So what joints it will make? There is Manubrio-sternal joint between the Manubrium and body of sternum, which is a secondary cartilaginous joint or symphysis. Then there is the Sternoclavicular joint, which is a synovial saddle type of joint. Then the first costal cartilage makes an articulation with the Manubrium, and it is known as first sternochondral articulation. It is a primary cartilaginous joint or synchondrosis. The upper part of second costal cartilage also makes an articulation with the Manubrium. That is the second sternochondral joint, which is a synovial joint of plane type. Coming to the body of the sternum, it consists of 4 segments. They are called the sternebrae, and it lies opposite the T5 to T8 vertebra, and the length of it is twice that of the Manubrium. It is longer, narrower and thinner. The widest part of the body of sternum is at the articulation of 5th costal cartilage. And there are 3 transverse ridges in front which indicate the fusion of the 4 sternebrae. 1, 2, 3 and 4 sternebrae. So this part is Manubrium, this is xiphoid, and this is the body, and you can see the articulations with the costal cartilages. At the junction of Manubrium with the body will be the second costal cartilage at the sternal angle. 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th also will be there. So they will be joined here at this point. The presenting parts of the body of sternum are the two surfaces and three borders like in the Manubrium, and you have seen on the anterior surface the three transverse ridges, whereas the posterior surface is smooth and concave. The upper border will form the Manubrio-sternal joint at the junction of the T4 and T5 vertebra. The lower border will form the Xiphisternal joint at the level of T8 or T9 vertebra. The lateral borders are there which will have 6 facets for the chondrosternal joints which are synovial. The 3rd to 6th costal cartilages will have full facets, and there will be demi-facets for the 2nd and 7th. So full facets for the 3rd to 6th and demi-facets for the 2nd and 7th, because the other half of demi-facet for the 2nd costal cartilage is in relation with the Manubrium, and similarly the other half of the demi-facet for the 7th costal cartilage will be with the xiphoid process. We see the anterior surface. On each half, it's closely related to the lateral border, will be the pectoralis major muscle. So, the anterior surface close to the lateral border gives origin to pectoralis major, which also takes origin from the Manubrium. Then coming to the posterior surface. So it gives attachment to the muscles and ligaments. It gives origin to the transversus thoracis or sternocostalis muscle, which is the muscle of the innermost layer in the thoracic wall. And it also gives attachment, which are not shown here, to what are known as the sternopericardial ligaments. So there is a superior sternopericardial and there is an inferior sternopericardial ligaments. And it is also related to the, on its right half and left half it will differ. On the right half it is related to the pleura and anterior border of lung. Pleura and anterior border of lung on right side. The upper two sternebrae are related to the pleura and lower two sternebrae to the pericardium and heart. So on the left side, the upper two sternebrae are related to the left pleura and lung, whereas the lower two sternebrae are related to the heart. So that's what you are seeing in this image. So the right half, pleura and anterior border of right lung, whereas the left half in relation with the upper two sternebrae, pleura and lung on left side, lower two sternebrae with the pericardium and heart. The lateral borders, they present notches for articulation with 2nd to 7th costal cartilages, which you can see the notches for the 2nd to 7th costal cartilages. 7th is partial, 2nd is also partial, that means demi-facets. Between these notches, it gives attachment to the anterior or external intercostal membrane and internal intercostal muscles. Coming to the xiphoid process. The word xiphos is derived from Greek, which means sword. So xiphoid process is like a sword. And what does it contain? Usually it is high in cartilage. So in infants it is cartilaginous and it gets ossified in adults. There is slow ossification and fusion of this xiphoid process with the body of the sternum. the shape of it is also variable. It can be triangular, broad, bifid or perforated. What are the presenting parts? It also has two surfaces, the upper border, the lower border and two lateral borders. The anterior surface and posterior surface are the two surfaces. There is the upper border which forms the xiphisternal joint, which is a symphysial joint, and lower end it gives attachment to linea alba, which is linea alba is formed by fusion of the three aponeuroses of the muscles in the anterolateral abdominal wall. The lateral borders will have demifacet for 7th costal cartilage. What will be the attachments? On the anterior surface will be the insertion of the rectus abdominis muscle and the aponeurosis of external oblique muscles. On the posterior surface, it gives attachments to the diaphragm, the transversus thoracis muscle of the thorax and the transversus abdominis muscle, it is related, gives, and then it is also related to the left lobe of liver. What about the ends? The upper end articulates with the body forming the primary cartilaginous joint, and the lower end it gives attachment to the linea alba. This is the linea alba. And in this table you can observe the whole sternum, including the Manubrium body and xiphoid process, and the attachments of muscles on their anterior surface, posterior surface and lateral border, and the relations. For example, if you see the Manubrium, we have already learned. It gives attachment to the sternal head of sternomastoid and sternal head of pectoralis major, origin for these muscles. Whereas the posterior surface for the sternohyoid and sternothyroid muscles. And the lateral border between the costal facets for the anterior intercostal membrane and the internal intercostal membrane. Similarly, if you see the body, there is extension of the sternal head of pectoralis major muscle origin, and there is the posterior surface, it will give attachment to the sternocostalis muscle and the superior and inferior sternopericardial ligaments, and between the costal facets, the anterior intercostal membrane and internal intercostal muscles. If you take the xiphoid process, it gives attachment to the aponeurosis of external oblique, then the aponeurosis of internal oblique and transversus abdominis and rectus abdominis. I means insertion, O means origin. Then the posterior surface to the extension of sternocostalis and the sternal strips of diaphragm, origin of these two. Then if you see the other components that are related to it, to the Manubrium, and you know about the jugular notch, where the two layers of general investing layer of deep fascia of neck is attached to the upper border, forming the suprasternal space of Burns, which contains the interclavicular ligament we have mentioned. In addition, it contains the sternal heads of sternomastoid muscle, the jugular venous arch connecting the two anterior jugular veins in the neck. Then there is the few lymph nodes will be there, and the Manubrium posterior surface. It forms the anterior boundary of superior mediastinum, wherein we have studied that it is related to the anterior margins of both lungs, the thymus gland the left brachiocephalic vein, the arch of aorta and its branches, the trachea and esophagus. The body of the Manubrium forms the anterior boundary for mediastinum, and which contains the loose areolar tissue, anterior margins of both lungs. It is related, and it is also related to the sternocostal surface of fibrous pericardium. Coming to the xiphoid, at its tip it gives attachment to the linea alba. So the previous table you can compare with these pictures. So the attachments of the various muscles you can see, and the reflections of the pleura on the right and left sides, and in this gap it is related to the fibrous pericardium and heart. Okay, you are seeing the both anterior view and posterior view along with the costal cartilages you are seeing, and the muscular attachments you are seeing in this picture. And same thing, you can study the attachments of the muscles, the sternal head of sternomastoid. Then you can see the extension of the pectoralis major muscle and the lines of reflection of the pleura on the right and left sides in relation with the anterior surface, and the attachments of the rectus abdominis, the linea alba and the aponeurosis of abdominal muscles in relation with linea with the xiphoid process. Then this is on the posterior surface. Here also you can see the lines of reflection and the origin of the two muscles, sternohyoid and sternothyroid, in relation with the manubrium, and the transversus thoracis muscle and the diaphragm in relation with the xiphoid process. See this picture. You can see the manubrium and the body, and this is the second costal cartilage. This is the sternal angle, and the manubrium forming the boundary for the superior mediastinum. The contents of superior mediastinum, you can see the common carotid artery on the right, which is coming from the brachiocephalic trunk, and then there is the left common carotid artery you are seeing, and behind the body you are seeing the heart. Okay, this is the content of the inferior mediastinum. Here also you can see the relations of the posterior surface, and you know what is angle of Lewis, and then the boundary between the superior mediastinum and the inferior mediastinum, and this is the body of the sternum, which forms the anterior boundary for the inferior mediastinum, which is divided by the presence of this heart into anterior mediastinum, middle mediastinum and posterior mediastinum. So the body of sternum forms the anterior boundary for the anterior mediastinum, and then you can understand the posterior relations by reviewing the pleural reflections and then the borders of the lung. And here you can revise the articulations of sternum as a whole. Previously you have seen up to here, that is the joints of the manubrium you have studied. So the joints which the manubrium forms, sternoclavicular joint and first costochondral joints, and then this is the second costochondral joint, and this is the manubriosternal joints, and you can see the other costochondral joints, which are all primary cartilaginous joints. All are primary cartilaginous joints. Then we are seeing their articulations with the sternum. Then there is the Xiphi-sternal joint, which is a secondary cartilaginous joint. And you can see the 3rd to 7th sternochondral joints, which are atypical synovial joints. In this picture, you can see the ossification of sternum. So, you can see the time of appearance of the ossification centers. So, for the Manubrium in the 5th month of intrauterine life, for the body 6th, 7th, 8th and 9th months of intrauterine life, and for the xiphoid process 4 years after birth, and their union with one another at different ages starting from 15, 20 and 25 for this sternobrae and 40 years for the xiphoid process with the body, and around 60 years the ossification of Manubrium with the body. The time of union is the last one is the Manubrio sternal. What is the clinical importance of sternum, which we will study under these headings? One is the sternal puncture, the funnel chest, pigeon chest or pectus carinatum, sternotomy, sternal foramen and ectopia cordis. The sternal puncture, as I told you, it is rich in cancerous bone and it is highly vascular. Red marrow is present between the two compact layers of bone. Hence, it is approachable for sternal puncture for collection of the bone marrow in cases of anemias, leukemias and hematopoietic disorders. Why this sternum is chosen for sternal puncture is because of its subcutaneous location and thinness of compact bone. Then funnel chest, which is also known as the Pectus Excavatum. The sternum, you can see, is growing inwards. See here, compare the normal with this one. So it is growing inwards. There is the depression in the chest over the sternum. If it is severe, it interferes with the organs immediately behind, that is the heart and lungs. Then pigeon chest or pectus carinatum. The sternum projects anteriorly. The chest will be flattened on each side and it can be seen in the rickets. Then the procedure known as the sternotomy, where they will split the sternum for accessing the contents in the superior and middle mediastinum. You can see the content of the middle mediastinum, the heart and the great vessels. Sternal foramen. We are seeing a foramen in the sternum. This is due to incomplete fusion of the sternal ossification centers. In this condition, you are seeing the heart outside the thorax. So, this is due to the complete failure of union of the two halves of sternum during development. So, the heart will be exposed outside through the gap between the two halves of sternum or sternobrae. Now, look at the questions which you have to answer. Name the parts of sternum. Name the articulation of Manubrium sterni and their type. Manubrium sterni, xiphoid process. Or sometimes you may get a question, name the articulations of sternum and their type. So with this, now you have understood what is sternum, what are the various parts of it, and what are the various presenting parts and their relations with the thoracic organs and their articulations with the other bones.